I'm Jay Marks. I'm an organizational consultant, and my focus is working with senior teams, working with organizations that are growing and have growing pains. I had the pleasure in my career of working for a premier global investment firm that grew from 600 when I had started till 9,600. So I learned a lot about growth, working with dispersed teams and all the things that come along with that kind of growth. And my other focus is culture and change management, particularly focusing on how do you get inclusion, psychological safety, and involvement in your culture.
My name is Andrea Pagnosi. I am a career empowerment coach who has worked about 30 years in the life sciences industry. And I am now working with clients to help realize their next career endeavor. I like to say that I'm looking to help people realize their true career potential in 2022. Rhonda?
Thanks, Andrea. I'm Ronda Robinson, and I am bringing a third different aspect to our series in changing the Great Resignation to the Great Alignment. I spent over 20 years in training and talent development, and my focus is helping employee retention by applying behavioral neuroscience and psychology to how the brain works and how people work. And that's encompassing the employee experience from hire to retire. Today's focus is about redefining the role of the manager. And it'd be really helpful, I think, to take a step back and outline how we got to today in terms of manager focus and what we're asking them to do. And quite frankly, we haven't changed the world of work since the industrial age. Oh, I said it. Yep. Since the industrial age, where we really had a parent-child relationship with employer and employees, where it's more, you do what we say, we create the rules, and there's no talk back, no negotiation. But part of the Great Resignation has led to employees really wanting to have an adult relationship. In the meantime, the manager has gotten caught in the middle of the changing expectations of the employee, but being stuck in the not changed so much world of organizations. So let's fast forward since the industrial age to the 1990s. This was really where we saw a major change in how work was done and the role of the manager. This was a process efficiency era where there was a real focus on reducing bureaucracy and improving efficiencies. And by doing that, they flattened the hierarchies. Remember, a lot of layers were eliminated in the 1990s. So this required the remaining managers to supervise larger teams and to serve as a player coach. They used to be, their primary job was to manage people, but now they were asked to shoulder some of the actual getting work done, taking on some of the workers' tasks, which made them widen their responsibilities. And along with this, we saw a trend of hiring people who were good at doing the work into management roles because they'd already tackled the how to do the work part. Now they add on people management to their role. Let's go into the 2000s, where it became the digitization era. This made managers work faster because of access to technology, email, etc., and at your fingertips data. But it also reduced the power that they had. Since it democratized access to information, that meant managers were really no longer a critical part of this information loop. So they had to work harder to stay on top of just-in-time information and find ways to stay more relevant. They started to feel this loss of power, control, and status. And that's why we started to see them find other ways to get attention and show their worth in some of the egotistical behaviors of that time that we still see today. So then we go into the 2010s, and this was the agile matrix era. This era aimed to turbocharge innovation by strengthening employee skill sets across the organizations. We didn't see people start from a low level and progress up the ladder linearly. Instead, they asked people to change jobs frequently, moving into different roles across the organization, oftentimes laterally. This meant that project teams could be assembled on an as-needed basis, with dotted line reporting structures becoming very commonplace. So now managers found themselves temporarily short-staffed while employees were on loan to project teams, but also they started to lose touch with their direct reports because they were spending more time under the supervision of this temporary project leader, yet were still responsible for performance reviews and advocating for career opportunities. Then we get into the 2020s, the empathetic work era. The pandemic altered employee priorities, including when and where work was done. And managers lost the perceived control that they had over employees' performance and behavior because they didn't have employees in seats right in front of them. This was especially pronounced for those leading through their own expertise that they prided themselves on starting in the 1990s. This placed a larger burden on managers who are now expected not only to have the technical expertise, but manage people who may not be on site and cultivate these empathetic relationships in the midst of everything else that they should be doing. Today, our call to action is the current role of the manager is not sustainable. It requires a shift in power, in skills, and in structure. So Jay, back to you to lead us into that conversation.
When we start to talk about things changing and Rhonda saying, can the manager do it all in a sense? And that role has become a challenge. So now we start to see headlines like from Forbes earlier this year. The highlight is the C-suite puts the onus on managers to improve culture, retention, performance, while employees expect their manager to support, motivate, and value them. When I saw this and when we were talking about it years ago, I was doing some manager training and one of the participants said, as managers, we're the ham. And I said, what do you mean we're the ham? So she said, we're the meat in between the two slices of bread, the managers above us and the employees we manage. So in that regard, I think we have always been the ham. But I think what's different today is, as Rhonda touched on, we're asking managers to do everything they've always done in the past. And there has been an evolution of the role, but there's so much more that we have been asking managers to do in the last couple of years. So if we look at another perspective, this was from an article in Harvard Business Review just a couple of months ago by a couple of people who I think probably aren't just trying to sensationalize a headline, but Diane Gerson was the previous Chief Human Resources Officer for IBM, and Linda Grattan is one of my favorite business authors from London School of Business. And they have saying, we've closely observed the changing job of the manager, and we can report that a crisis is looming. They talk also, as Rhonda mentioned, the traditional role is changing. We need great people leaders. And then they refer to another article from Harvard Business Review where they partnered with Gartner, and I'll be referencing that in a minute. But if a couple of folks like this are saying we have a crisis looming, I'm going to believe we might have to start paying attention to something. They're saying these are the main challenges when overseeing hybrid teams. My experience is these challenges have always been there. I don't think it's really new in a sense, but I highlighted the couple of things that I have really been amplified by the last couple of years, hybrid and remote work and the additional stress that people have been under, both managers and their teams. Trusting folks to get the work done because I don't see them the way that I used to. And again, gauging workloads and preventing burnout because I still don't see them the way that I used to. And I'm not sure exactly what they're experiencing. So I think that those are two bigger issues. For those of you who have done employee surveys in the last 10, 20, or 30 years, I don't think Communicating effectively, recognizing accomplishments, and supporting development is anything new. People have not done well on those in any survey I've ever done. Maybe communicating effectively, but the other two have always been issues. And again, the added complexity of today's world just adds to those two.
Jay, can I add an extra thought to that? Just another layer, like you mentioned, communicating effectively, recognizing accomplishments, and supporting professional development are very standard issues we continue to strive to solve. But when I look at these five in totality, those three these are things that organizations push out to solve. They push out to solve. But trusting employees, engaging workloads, and preventing burnout require managers to pull in. What I mean by that is they need to be thinking about what the employee is going through and invite the employee in to solve for this. These aren't things that you can create an initiative overarching and do something to the employees to solve it. Like professional development, you can create a structure, you can create programs, you can create metrics and evaluations to push down to solve for that. But trust and workloads preventing burnout require you to pull in the employee experience, to pull in the employee perceptions. Andrea, with your career, what are you seeing from employees about these two issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think these two issues are the number one reason why we're seeing 40% of people who started a new job in the last 2 years through the pandemic and their great resignation, which we're trying to shift to a great realignment. That realignment is not yet realized. So 40% of those people are now, again, 1 foot out the door, because these two things that are highlighted here, emulating trust within a workplace and preventing burnout, aren't being met. They're basically finding there's not a greener pasture where they've gone to. And in fact, it's shampoo, rinse, repeat. They're going into the same problem at a different company. So there's no greater reward. They may be making a little more money. They may have gotten a job title change. They may have gotten a wink and a nod from somebody who sucked them in, who was seemingly a great manager and probably would be under normal auspices. But under these two situations, they're becoming burnt out. And they've got helicopter managers that are just nervous because the top brass doesn't really understand. They never managed during these times. So they have to also shift the way that they manage. Senior leaders need to oversee the mid-levels far differently. They're doing the same thing over and over again and trying to get a different outcome.
So Andrea, that just sparked a memory. You and I have talked about this before, going back to that matrix advancement approach. And we talked about how now the C-suite are a product of that matrix approach, spending very little time in a single role, just doing it for a brief period of time. Perhaps they are lacking a bit of the insights of truly being in the trenches and a first line management role.
Absolutely. I call it getting further away from source, right? The further they are away from actually being in the trenches and in front of the customers, whomever those customers may be, and some of them may never have been, right? They may have been overseeing somebody in operations. They didn't really work in operations. You and I have talked about this. They may have had some experience in sales, but they were never really a salesperson and carried the bag. So when they've been on these extremely auspicious fast tracks to senior leadership, they don't really have the flavor for how to troubleshoot at other levels of the organization. So they expect those mid-level managers and those senior directors to be able to work it out themselves. When in reality, if you've never lived it, you don't even know how to flex to situations like a pandemic. You don't know how to lead effectively or authentically. So they're not really able to right the ship. And you can look at article after article that will say, this CEO, that CEO may have handled something completely erroneously because they don't have the wherewithal nor the experience at that level to really reach the people at that level. So it's very troublesome. And when I'm working with clients, and I've worked with clients at the C-suite too, they're just like, I can't reach these people. I'll start to unpack. Tell me about the jobs that you've had. Tell me about how you've gotten there. And very often it's very void of that mid-level management experience. And so we pivot the discussion to how can you better train your mid-level managers?
So then what we're facing is the art of inexperience. And I think that that one is, in a sense, more forgivable, but it doesn't really create a different outcome. If you are in truly uncharted waters, which because of the degree of complexity and ambiguity that have emerged in the last couple of years, there are a lot of folks in uncharted waters. And so I think part of what we wanted to accomplish today is being able to identify all of these things that folks are dealing with. And I'll try to get through these next couple of slides quickly, and then really get into the discussion of, given what the uncharted waters might look like at a participant's particular organization, what are some of the ways that you can work to resolve it? And what are some of the first steps to take? Because I think that a lot of folks are experiencing that degree of uncertainty and inexperience with what's been going on. So those were some really good points, as always. Okay, here we have another article pointing out that it's time to free the middle manager. So again, if we look at what's really going on in the world, the typical model, as we know it, is becoming obsolete. A lot of digital infrastructure is taking place. Technology has made it easier to track work if you have that technology available to you. Not every organization does. And again, this is something that I think is so important, and I've worked in organizations where this was the case. Management shouldn't be the only way to advance. And as we talk more about the role of manager growing, and it's taken on so many different aspects. And I've certainly had people say to me over the years, whether it was in a one-on-one situation or in, again, some type of manager training, you mean I have to manage people too? So that whole idea of managing the work and managing the people, again, isn't a new idea. But what is new is some organizations are starting to say, you know what, we really do need to maybe do a little bit of redesign here and set those different functions apart or delineate them more clearly. It's not all falling on the middle manager to do everything: work, process, systems, technology, and people.
Jay, I just want to interject real quickly on that point. One of the other things that I do when I work with clients who are saying, this is not the right place for me, we peel back the layers of the onion and we say, do you really dislike the company, or do you dislike what you're doing and the team you're working on and the manager you're working with? It ties into what you were just saying, is that maybe you haven't been long enough there to really prove yourself. But most companies are more open to, instead of suffering another turnover, which in and of itself is costly and they need the headcount, maybe explore opportunities elsewhere in the organization that can broaden you on a team that is more fulfilling, because it isn't always the company that they feel is not right for them. It's just the situation they're in. And so I've had a few clients that have actually really excelled in the fact that, hey, I love the company, I'm just not getting what I need from this leader. So it's that, I just wanted to make that point, is that sometimes a step to the side may make all the difference for the individual who is not a strong leader, and then keeping that person with the company and really digging into how can that former manager be better and get the true feedback and drill down is more constructive long-term.
I think it's that, and it's also a lot of people really do best as individual contributors. I think we've all seen over the years, what do? You take your best programmer, you take your best accountant, you take your best salesperson, you take your best whatever, because they obviously have good skills. And historically, we would think, oh, the logical thing to do is make that person a manager. And then, as I think some companies do and some companies do not, come to the awareness of, oh, these are really different skill sets. Being a great programmer is very different than managing a group of great programmers. And I've certainly seen enough situations where you take a great whatever, make them a manager, and now you have unhappy teams because this person shouldn't be a manager. They should be a strong individual contributor. And the other thing that organizations have to do to make that work is make the compensation provide some equity there to say, and again, I worked for an organization that was really great at this, and that's where I saw it in action and learned it. Make the compensation equitable to stay as an individual contributor rather than feel like I'm only going to make more money if I do something that I really shouldn't be doing. This was from some research that HBR did together with Gartner, and they're suggesting leading with empathy, and we'll get into that in more depth. Gartner's saying at best half of the managers out there are prepared for this. So what are we going to do to prepare people for this role? And as we just touched on, there are a number of different avenues you can look at. There are structural resolutions to that problem. There are role resolutions to that problem. And there are training resolutions to that problem. So depending on what an organization really is going to expect of their managers going forward, I think that's how you decide how to prepare the half that are not prepared for this future. Highlighted in orange, to me, it becomes the crux of it, is the empathetic manager is someone who can contextualize performance and behavior, the business side and the people side. And again, this isn't new. This is what good managers have always done. I think what is different today is the ante is just increased. I expect you to be able to manage the business and manage all of the things that go along with that today has become a challenge, focusing on technical skills to the exclusion of the people side of the equation. That's when people would say to me in training, you mean I have to manage people too? I want to manage the work. What we're saying today is the manager who has empathy, it's not just a one-way street to say I have empathy towards the behavior or the stress or the change that's taking place, but they also understand the performance side of that equation, which is any organization is in business to make results. That's why organizations exist. And so I have to be able to manage results and all the things that are going on in the environment today. This is our last slide. And this was really our list when just looking at our experience and what you read in the world today. But it's everything that a manager was responsible for before 2020. And then, and this will vary by organization, by manager. Now I have to deal with not only a hybrid environment, but understanding hybrid equity. One size doesn't fit all. It has certainly come to the fore more so in the last couple of years, and the responsibilities that managers have in that regard. Constant change and ambiguity. Mental health has emerged as a major issue that organizations and as a result managers are facing. And you just go down the list, understanding the future of work, which is a new phrase that's out there. So managers have a lot to do. And to me, it's pretty easy to understand why they're frustrated, burnt out, and we're seeing more managers now leave their roles than we did in 2020 and 2021 and 2020. That's picking up. So what do we do to help our managers? What tools do we give them to be empathetic in the way that was described earlier, to look at the business need and the people need, which is so different, the organizational need, and to say, where do we go with that? And I think probably one of the first things to do is to, if you're the leader or if you're an HR person or if you're a consultant, to be able to take a step back and say, what do I think the managers here need? What's important and what are the priorities that we're facing in the organization? Where do we see some strengths and weaknesses, and how do we make that happen? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Come back to say hello to everybody who's here. And let's get into a conversation about how do we really help managers today. And if this is, any questions, any raised hands, we'd certainly want to hear from folks who have joined us. I've been talking for a little while, so Andrea and Rhonda, why don't you run with it at this point? I've said enough for now, anyhow.
I want to reach out to Angela at Consult Daily. I couldn't agree with you more. She had put in the chat in response to how are people supporting the managers is what I asked. she said, at Andrea, the role of managers continue to evolve with increasing responsibilities. So there is the tough balancing act. And I think that's so well said and so just disheartening, because I've quoted this in the previous episode, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. I have a dear friend, a mutual friend of Rhonda's as well, who says, if you have $1 to spend on training and development, you spend it on your mid-level managers. And I would actually say 50 cents of it should go to training and development, but 50 cents of it should go to support mechanisms, teaching them how to balance better and ways to support people. And we talked about it in our last episode, that it isn't about a stay or something like that. Those things can go a little bit of the way, but I think it's more holistically, how do we take some of that long laundry list that Jay showed off their plates and spread it a little bit more fervently across the organization? Instead of expanding headcount in certain ways, be more creative about how we create support roles that can support managers. And Angela, you said a mouthful. I couldn't agree more. Rhonda, I know that you speak to this quite a bit. What say you about that?
Yes, right now, in particular in organizations that are experiencing more than their tolerable level of turnover, and that means different things to different organizations. It doesn't have to mean an extraordinary percentage, but if you lose key players, just a few turnovers in a few key areas can be very painful. And when we look at organizations that are understaffed and or overworked, it's the same thing. If you're overworked, that means that you're understaffed because you're not leveraging or have enough people to do the work. Managers are experiencing this burnout, but how do you dig out of the quicksand of overwork? Is it by taking another mental health day to recharge your batteries just to deplete it very fast again when you come back? Or should, and this is my opinion, coaching with clients is, if you spend that 50 cents or $1 investing in your managers to the point of focusing on not making me the best manager that I can be, but how do I coach my people to be the best workers that they can be and be an empathetic, and how to be an empathetic leader. The research shows that employees, 75% of employees will work harder and longer hours for an empathetic leader. It's not necessarily an aha moment, but the majority of people will work harder and longer. So what makes more sense to relieve the burden on the manager and make the organization more productive? To make the manager do more or offload some of those task-oriented, doing the work-oriented responsibilities and instead invest in them to coach their people to be the best that they can be and be more productive and more efficient. If I have a team of 10 people, it's not hard to do the math. I can do more, or I can have 10 people do a little bit more and do it better.
Angela raised her hand. I am going to unmute.
So I just relocated to the States. I'm from Jamaica, where I would have been in a middle manager role for years. So unlike in the States, where now I'm getting to understand that there was almost like quite a large percentage of the labor force that would have left during the COVID pandemic. That was not the case back home. The challenge I would have had is that I managed a cross-functional team, very wide portfolio. So as the middle manager, head of corporate services, which would cover logistics, finance, HR, admin, among other things, I did not have the level of support. I believe I did not have the level of support, not an admin, not a secretary, nothing like that. But I managed all of those portfolios. So when I spoke about the balancing act, Plus, I was the HR focal point. So the balancing act was trying to keep the organization going from day to day, managing people problems, which magnified 100% during the last 2 years. So I think for middle managers, a lot has to do with, for your own sanity, is trying to empower the staff that you do have, which in my case was not a lot, but I think the people aspect of it was crucial. And that's probably my major strength that allowed me to get through that. So I empowered the team that I had to work with. So there was no real demarcation like a boss-employee situation. We operated as a team. So whenever there were challenges, I just pulled them together and I said, look, guys, this is the situation. This is what we need to do. So I think engaging our team members, empowering them, keeping them in the know, that is important, the communication, so they at least know what is going on to give you the level of support that you would need to keep. I always say to keep the ship sailing. So I just wanted to share that quickly with you. Thank you.
Angela, that was fantastic. Clearly, you are an amazing people leader and intuitively know what to do, if not purposely know what to do. But there are 5 universal triggers that drive people's behavior. And it goes beyond external motivators like salary and perks and benefits and bonuses. And you touched on 2 of the 5 just in your example. So the 5 are certainty, autonomy, relationships, equality or a sense of fairness, and then status, feeling valued and appreciated. And your example of, as a manager who can't get all the work done by yourself, providing clear communication, pulling the team together, saying, here, this is what we need to solve for, is certainty. And then autonomy. You empowered your team to solve for it and to get the work done. And that, wrapped in a bow, equals trust. And there's nothing more powerful than trust in an organization. I'm just going to do the applause and finger snap because that was an amazing example. Thank you for sharing.
And it really gets at whether or not it's a matter of, how do I say it, necessity is the mother of invention. Oftentimes that's what drives us to say, I have to get more people involved. And what we're really seeing today is that when we talk about inclusion and belonging, well, what does that really mean? How do you make that happen? And to involve people in a genuine way. And again, in some cases, it sounds like you were a bit driven to have to involve them for your own sanity and to keep the ship afloat, keep the ship righted, as you said. And the other thing about that is when you include people and create that context, and this sounds like a great example of that idea of creating a context where you're looking at the people and the business because the people understood why they needed to participate more. When you think about it from a succession standpoint, the way you described what you were doing was really giving people an opportunity to show themselves and what they were capable of and rising in the organization and helping you out, which again, just to tag it on to Rhonda's comment, really goes a long way to creating the kind of trust and relationships and environment that people want to be in because that they feel that it serves them as well as you. As next steps, I'm going to presume that this considerations slide is up. Just to ask yourself, and maybe this is a great discussion for leaders in the organization, what's really important to us today? Because when I work with clients now, that's one of the first questions I ask. Given that everything or so many things have changed over the last couple of years, and what could be important is, what do we do about being remote? What could be important is, what do we do about giving our managers more tools? Now, so there are so many options, I think, to consider, but to ask what is important in our organization, and then what are the skills and characteristics related to those things, and do we see those as strengths or weaknesses or areas to be developed, or certain people who have them, certain people don't? We touched on this idea of the changing the role a bit, leader of work, leader of people. And so is that a discussion to have in your organization? What should managers not be doing? Again, when you look at everything that's out there, if you're in an organization that is in fact thinking our managers are just drowning, we really need to do something here to help sort this out and help them. What should they perhaps not be doing? And do you know what your manager's point of view is about all of this? Andrea just shared a great story with me that she had in the past week of a group of the senior leaders decide this is what we're going to do to create better inclusion in our organization. And they spent a lot of money and a lot of time, and some of them traveled 10-hour flights to make this thing happen, and they got there. And then the folks at the location said, you really didn't need to do this. We could have handled this in a very different way and still gotten very good results. And again, whether we're talking about just effectiveness or inclusion or involvement, or again, how do you create that sense of somebody's point of view matters? You ask, you do something to find out rather than say, we as the senior team have a genius idea that we're going to impose on you. And then that ends up backfiring. I want to ask Andrea and Rhonda to have any final thoughts or comments they'd like to share.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming on board today and for having the robust discussion, because I think it's going to warrant this part two that we're going to talk about in a second. But I think we're at a crossroads of corporations and organizational development. I've been in organizational development for 20 years, and I can tell you, I've never seen it evolve as quickly. I've seen it during the technology phase. I've seen it take shape with regard to women in the workplace on the rise. I think some industries are still struggling with that, but that's another topic for another show. But I think, honestly, this is the first time that I've seen an evolution. I was pleased to see in the chat earlier in our episode today that there are some companies that are stepping up to the plate, supporting and empathizing with their clients more, because we don't have a choice. We need to start listening to the people in the seats. If we're going to fill the seats, we need to listen to the people in there. So if I could boil this slide down to one thing that managers, leaders need to consider, is they need to consider the opinion of the people and have that be their North Star towards their own efficiency, their own solutions-based attitude, and come to the table with aligned, to use our word, an aligned viewpoint where we can move together collectively instead of trying to retrofit ideas and solutions that may not hit the mark. It's costly, it's ineffective, and quite frankly, it's what gets people to leave. So if you want people to stay, listen to the people. You can't give them everything, but you've got to do better than just give them cake. That's what I would leave people with.
Now I want cake. Clearly it's past lunchtime for me. I'm like, ooh, cake, that sounds good. So really what resonates with me is bullet number 2, the idea of where is the emphasis in the organization for managers? Is it leader of work or is it leader of people? And I've seen a number of case studies where organizations are rethinking the management role. And while maintaining job titles and compensation to be similar, they are delineating people who lead work, like projects and overseeing functions, as opposed to those who lead people. And it seems like in this era of empathy, leader of people is where the focus needs to be. And Jay talked about the ham sandwich being the ham in between upper management or the organization and the people below. I'm looking at it more as, let's turn it as a prism where, yes, the manager takes the corporate goals, but then expands that bright light into the colors of the rainbow on their team and letting each person on the team shine their brightest and best and get the work done through the people rather than trying to shoulder the workload themselves. And that leads into our topic for the next one in the Great Resignation to the Great Alignment series. We're going to be emphasizing the number one leadership skill that distinguishes legendary leaders from average ones in a high IQ talent pool. Managers are smart. Senior managers, leaders are smart. So what's the one thing that really sets them apart? And I invite Philip and Angela in particular to rejoin us, because you both said that you are seeing a great deal of empathy being applied at the senior management level. So let's talk about that, because the one place that folks tend to get hung up, they all agree that empathy, which is that number one leadership skill, is important, but they don't know how to do empathy.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I think if you want to drop us any type of feedback or connect with us, we're all on LinkedIn, obviously. And hopefully we'll see you the next time.